Welcome to the Why Not podcast, where I talk with leaders in business and education about innovation and change. Meet Bryce Nobles, a dynamic fintech strategist fueling innovation at Lone Pro. With a sharp eye for market trends and an unshakable passion for cutting-edge technology, Bryce has consistently transformed ideas into groundbreaking financial solutions. His leadership style combines creativity, data-driven insights, and bold action, driving growth and energizing teams wherever he goes. Whether he's navigating complex fintech landscapes or champion innovation, Bryce brings contagious enthusiasm and strategic clarity. I am thrilled to have him on today's episode of the Why Not podcast. Before you make any big decision about your life, you need to broaden your perspective. I call this getting out of the weeds. The weeds represent all the noise and toxicity, all the hustle and bustle, all the things you have to pay attention to right now, and all the things you can't get away from. You really need to take a pause, take the time to reset, wake up, and think about where you are in your life and where you want to go. When you step out of the weeds, you can see the full plan on the field. You can see the future thresholds you'll have to cross, the horizon that you're trying to get to. It's seeing the whole world view of what's ahead of you and coming to an understanding of it so that you can act on it. Remember, the hero's journey is an ongoing upward spiral. And that was written by today's guest, Bryce Nobles, in his book, Wake Upward. Fantastic book. Highly recommend. It'll be linked in the comments below.
Oh, thanks for getting it, man.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book.
Nerve-wracking to get your a thought out there in a book where you can't really take it back. So
yeah,
it's a nerve-wracking experience. I love it. It's great.
No, what was nerve-wracking about publishing your book? Because I think it's awesome. Obviously, as the author, tell me your perspective there.
Yeah, the whole reason why I wanted to write it was down the road. One of the options for my career is I want to be a writer. A writer on a ranch is what I talk about, and that's an aspirational goal. And I don't want to wait 30 years when I'm qualified. More qualified to write the book. I'm earlier in my career still, and I was like, let's go for it. So that was the most nerve-wracking thing, was the imposter syndrome behind it. Like, what credibility do I have, right, to be saying these things in there? And that changed a lot as I was going through that process of, well, it's not so much I'm coming as an authoritative figure. It's more of a co-discovery figure. Like, hey, here's what I found. This is what I live by, because I live by the book. And hopefully this can help you on your journey. Right. And if you can, because for me, I didn't have the book to read. Right. So I had to bumble along on myself, on my feet, trip over a lot to get there. But hopefully this can help out. And I designed it for people that are in their early careers, but it's applicable for everybody. But you have that moment you wake up and you're like, oh no, what am I doing right now? Yeah, we all go through that multiple times for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. No, thank you for sharing that. And it is truly inspiring, because the imposter syndrome is huge. I'm early on in my career as well, earlier than you are at right now. And the book has been really helpful. It has made a positive impact, at least on my life. I know it has on other people as well. And I'm very excited and hopeful that as you continue to grow in your career and get your voice out there, that more people take advantage of the fact that you've already written this awesome book, and the fact that you were brave enough to do that at any stage of your career, let alone early in your career. I think that says a lot towards the honesty and the authenticity of the work there. So really appreciate that from you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate the thought there, and it's wild. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, so my first question, in your book, you talk a little bit about the hero's journey. I'd love to hear from your own words, Bryce. Well, obviously the book is your own words, but like right now, what has your hero's journey been?
Yeah, so I believe it's like a reciprocal, like an upward spiral, right? I talk to my wife a lot of, I'm spiraling downwards, right? Well, spiral upwards, where you think of the classic hero's journey, crossing the threshold, right? The belly of the whale, all that stuff in there, right? Once one journey ends, the next begins, right? But you keep going upward, and that's growth that way, right? For me, what I found in my life is I have a really funny purring motif, if you will, some fancy words there. But for me, I always start off really hot in my endeavor. I get some lucky break, I get some big opportunity, I get really accelerated in some path. Right? So another way, I get over my head pretty quick, right? Crash down, belly of the whale, and then I always have that comeback story, right? I love the underdog narrative, but for me, it's more of the going for the opportunity, even if I'm a fish out of water, right? Falling on my face, but overcoming that through just not giving up. And that's happened about 4 or 5 times in my life, which is awesome. And I haven't learned that lesson, but at the same time, I learn from those experiences, and I'm not afraid to take those chances because I can bet on myself, right? And that's my motif, if you will.
Yeah, I love that. As you were talking about that, I started thinking of different people that approach that differently, where it's like maybe they do fall down and they are the underdog, and it bruises their ego a little bit. But rather than getting up and like thriving on that and continuing to spiral up, they just keep spiraling down and down and down and down. And I've seen that happen too many times. And so I think, like, obviously, yes, you've highlighted a very common, frequent pain point for many professionals, especially early on, but your approach to it is different than a lot of what I've seen. So I'd love for you to help me understand how you've come to that mentality of spiraling upward and how you've taken that, like that underdog, the comeback story approach as fuel rather than discouragement.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples around me of this as well. So like, it's not just, oh, look at me, right? I by no means am I fully put together, got everything figured out. So I do like telling anecdotal stories just because I've been there, right? I've done through all those things that way, right? But I think the way to really look for it is my whole career, I've always had this like growth marketing, or even when I was in sales early in my career, I gravitated towards the name growth, right? And for me, like growth, there's another word for growth is acceleration. And I remember when I was in college, I think it's like one of the last classes I ever took. It was like a GE, it was like physical science, whatever, right? But I think it was acceleration is not just changing speed, but also changing direction. Right. And that's where that resonated with me. I was a humanities undergrad, so I always like to take like little things and try to apply them to my day-to-day mentality and stuff like that. It's the skill set I have. But
I love it.
So basically is that change of direction was a really big thing for me, and being self-aware of what direction am I headed in my career, in my life, in whatever endeavor, right? And there's a lot of great books out there. The One Thing is a great book on that. It has a really cool diagram of like, you're in the middle, and things in your life, your endeavors, your obligations, your aspirations are pulling you different directions, right? And the name of the game is not so much eliminating arrows pulling you back or directions you don't want to go, but realigning them so you're generally going that direction in your life, right? And you can have acceleration in your career, in your life, by change of direction, right? By definition, right? It's not just change of speed, it's change of direction, which I don't want to go too, I'm not a physicist or anything like that, but changing direction is kind of like on a roller coaster. When you change direction, there's a little bit of a pull, those G forces that way can be disorienting as well, right?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say here is being self-aware of your direction can really help you with your narrative, right? Where is this taking me? Right. And playing out the scenario. It's as easy as that, right? Is okay, if I were to stay in this, what doors does this open for me? What doors does this close? It's super hard to realize, is this something I want or not when you're young, right? With time, it gets a little easier. But if you can map it out, right? Or if you can talk to someone, draw it out, whatever, right? Here's where this takes me. Here's what doors open. Here's what doors will close. And then you think like years down, like decades down the road, right? That's such a crazy concept of you can do most things with decades of time, right? If you really think about it, and if you're willing to sacrifice enough for it, right? So what direction are you going? Are you intentional on that direction, or are you trapped in that direction? Sometimes we get trapped in things and our obligations, and we get really locked in on something, right? And it's hard to change direction, but the more you can change direction on your own, before you get really locked into things, or over time slightly bend it just a couple of degrees, right? And so instead of going this way, you're going this way, right? That's where you can have a lot more, I think, personal satisfaction, right? Of not going too many concepts too quick on you, but I believe in not just having a goal, but having a value plane, right? So think of like any sports field. Most sports fields have a boundary line to a football field, basketball field, pickleball court, right?
Yeah. Love the mention of
Volleyball
pickleball.
court, that way, right? There's an out of bounds line, right? Those are your values that you pick and you select, right? And those values that you personally select, right? When your goal conflicts that value, well, you're out of bounds, right? So either you got to refine your value, refine your goal. Too many of us are just goal oriented. Not enough of us have set values that we determine ourselves. Growing up, I was in the Boy Scouts. There's the Boy Scout law, right? 12 different things to live by, right? That's good and all, right? But I try to be thrifty, but that's not really a big value for me, right? Honesty is more important for me, right? I had that be more in there. And then I'm not reckless spender, but it's one of those things where like one of those innate values that are just like really ingrained in you that are more fountains to draw upon, versus just aspirational things. So that was a lot there. Sorry to go off a ramble.
No,
there, but
thank you.
I'm very passionate about the subject. So
thank you. That was very helpful, and I really appreciate that. I'm just digesting everything that you were walking through. The saying that you mentioned, like the growth is not just about speed, but direction. I feel like that's particularly useful, at least for me right now, because I feel like that shift in perspective or mindset in a way can prevent burnout. And burnout is real. And I'm still very early in my career, but I've experienced it from time to time. I know many people have experienced it pretty tragically and dramatically. And so I appreciate you saying that, because like you, I obsess about growth, both from a marketing perspective. Full confession here. I have looked at your career path and was like, okay, what can I learn from Bryce and what can I take into mine? Because it's like you were a growth marketer. Okay, I need the title of growth marketer. Is like just trying to
monkey see, monkey do better, right? That's LinkedIn. I love it.
But it's like, just full transparency there. I'm not going to pretend like that's not what I'm doing. But
I've done it with a lot of people too. I'm all for it.
I love it. But help me understand that a little bit better, though, in regards to changing direction, not just speed. Because I think pacing is really hard, especially as we look at what can be automated, as we look at what AI can replace or do instead, and as we look for ways to optimize and to improve and to grow. I feel like a lot of times those conversations are like around the grind, in the sense of like just work harder and harder and harder and harder, get less sleep and less sleep. And your point, I'm not saying it contradicts that, but it's a different angle on it that I want to dive into a little bit more.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to go with this. I would say, with direction, one of the hardest things to see, like a new color, right, is self-awareness. Right. That's why you need mentors. That's why you need people to talk to, your own board of directors, if you will, right, with various perspectives in there. Obviously, your own inner voice on there as well, right? But you have so many assumptions that you're built upon, right? Like our brains are always making assumptions and validating with experience and wisdom and reading books and consuming all the stuff. But that gives you a set of assumptions. Oh man, I can't do that, right? Because I've tried that and that was a bad experience, right? So one, challenge your assumptions, right? In a safe A/B test type of way, right? Don't try to challenge all your assumptions at once. Pick one. Hey, I'm going to try doing this a little bit different. All right. That's a really great way to look at it. And there was another one that came to mind. It slipped out of my mind there, but I would say that with your direction and working too much. So early in my career, loved it, right? I was busy, right? There wasn't as nearly as many obligations as when now I'm in 30, right? Where I call it the pull of life comes at you pretty hard, right? So you can call it family, obligations. They made me a leader of my congregation out here, which I don't know why they did that, but I am. We're about ready to travel Europe for a month. My wife being a beach volleyball player.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I don't have the luxury of working a 55-hour week. I just don't. So that whole hustle through, more time to do it, it's not an option. There's just not enough time for what's being this sounds very ego, but people that know it, being a high demand person, as you provide a lot of value, as you do a lot of things, you're going to be in high demand and people are going to need your time, right? So working those extra hours is not a luxury I have in the lifestyle I choose.
Yeah.
Right. Another perspective is, this is what I usually tell people for career advice if they're trying to move up early in their careers, is early in your career, it takes you, let's say 40 hours or 45 or 50 hours to do your job a week, right? It's an efficiency game. How can you get the same or more input or output with less input, right? So can you do your job in 40 hours, right? Can you do your job in 35 hours? That's usually where I tell people to start. Go from 40 to 35. And then that extra 5 hours that's when you're allowed to do that extracurricular project. And multiple times in my career, that extracurricular project turned into my next role. And I provided more value doing that project than my current job. And then they made that switch naturally, right? So then you get it down to 30, then to 25, then to 20, right? 20 hours, right? Like that. So that can help you with the directional thing. It's, with when you go fast or small, it's efficiencies, right? As you get good, right? And kind of alluding to the 7 points, the tail end of it is nail it and then scale it, which we heard a lot. Nailing it is a lot through your own efforts. Scaling it is removing yourself from the equation with people, process, technology. So then that's how you can, again, we're not talking so much change of direction here, but we're talking speed and work hard, hustle culture, go get it, right? Well, it's an efficiency game where you can still have the same output with less input because there's more endeavors to do, right? More extracurriculars, if you will.
Yeah. That's very helpful. Very helpful advice. You mentioned some of your 7-point framework. Let's dive into there. I feel like that's a natural segue to start talking about that as well. It relates very much towards what we're discussing now. So in your book, you have the 7-point framework for a career narrative, which I love that idea of a career narrative in and of itself.
Yeah.
Could you explain those points to me and why they are important?
Yeah. So as I read through them or as I walk through them, try to figure out where you are on those, right? Okay. And say, I'm here. This is one of those where you can do it. And it's one of those, again, reciprocal journeys of at one time you can have been here, but now you're here, right? So number one, the ride along, right? You're just soaking it in. Usually you just started, right? You're riding along, right? Number two is providing value, right? So not only you're riding along, but maybe you're taking notes that saves time for somebody, or you're providing some tangible value, right? Which leads into the third point is gain trust, right? That is the most pivotal one. Is not just you're on the project, but you're a trusted person on the project. There's a difference between that, providing value and being trusted, right? Once you get trust, then you have the opportunity to take ownership, right? And there's a difference between trust and ownership, right? Being a driver is way different than a contributor, right? And it's very important. And then when you are when you're the driver, right, the owner, you nail it, which we just talked about through yourself. You scale it, removing yourself from the equation, right? So nailing it can be very inefficient, but scaling it is starting to hit that efficiency. And then the last point is either you lead it or you leave it, right? And a lot of times people choose to lead it. For me, I always try to leave it. It's like the Tom Sawyer analogy of like painting the fence, where his aunt told him, hey, you need to go whitewash the fence, whether paint it, right? And he's like, oh, this is dumb, right? I don't want to do this. So he entices the team around him to paint the fence for him, and then he gets everyone to do the paint the fence, and he gets the job done, but indirectly through him. Yeah. Kind of a mischievous, adolescent story, but same approach of like you can pass it off to someone, and their success is your success as you move on to another and bigger endeavor. So just say it again, right along, provide value, gain trust, take ownership, nail it, scale it, lead it, or leave it is the approach I like to do. So over to you, Noah. Where do you feel like you're in your kind of career phase? Are you in the nailing it? Are you in the ride along? Where are you at?
Yeah, great question. I feel like right now I am trying to figure out the building trust element. Because like you mentioned, like there is a difference between building value and gaining trust. I'd love
Yep.
to understand that difference a little bit more, because I definitely moved past like the ride along stage where like now instead of just trying to prove I can do what everybody else can do, I'm trying to show where I'm different, where I can bring value that maybe other people can't as much, or differentiation there. But there is a difference from that and like building out that trust. And that's what I'm currently trying to figure out. So yeah, I'd love to
Yeah.
dive in there if you're willing.
Yeah, again, these are more intangible things, but one thing I look for with people that I hire is what I call clutch factor,
Mm.
right? That's a big thing for trust, right? I do a lot of events. Like last year, we did this like Burning Man fintech executive thing. We called it the Salt Flats Summit in the Salt Flats of Utah. Literally showing up in an RV, and vendors are putting up tents,
That's
right? And we have
awesome.
a small window, liveries for the executives that come out. We're busing them out there, right? And one thing that we saw was, hey, the buses won't go from the end of the road to the mile away where the camp is. There's a gap there, right? So it's not just
Hmm.
uh, providing value of how all the logistics are set up, but it's that trust of, hey, this is a bang bang play. How clutch are you to go figure out that solution? So what we did was all of the employees had rental cars. We had a fleet of cars, and I had this like awesome like van that was like way old, but like going. And then we turned it into this really fun experience where it was like, hey, on the salt flats you can go a little fast. So we all like had this fleet of cars, and it turned into like a free speed race. I mean, we weren't going exorbitantly fast or anything like that,
Sure.
but faster than you normally would go, and you're on the salt flats and the spectacle of it all, right? So like that's where I was trusted that in the even though that wasn't something that I knew was going to be an issue, right? Our team, and it wasn't me, it was probably two other people we kind of thought think together on this, right? But we came up with that solution in a very short amount of time, because can you imagine having them walk
A
or
mile.
just, oh sorry, didn't, it was like you had to figure it out, right? So cool story aside, boiling it down is clutch factor of push comes to shove, are you going to get it done? And sometimes it's like not so much like, okay, you're really good at field events or you're good at producing copy for papers, right? It's more of like, this is the outcome. I
Mm.
don't really care how you get there, but get there, right? With ethics and that kind of thing
Sure.
recorded,
Yeah.
right? But that's the trust factor, is that consistency, right?
Mm.
Reliability, and then a little bit of range of variability of multiple different kinds of products. You don't want to be a one-trick pony in today's age, right? I used to pride myself in being a specialized generalist, right? Where I can just do a little bit of everything, right? And my own flavor, right? There's
Yeah.
definitely specialists as well, but the more up you go, the more of a generalist you need to be, because you're going different departments and working with different people and stuff like that. So
Mm.
it is, I give you, okay, not just that you can do this single threaded project, but I know that you've proven yourself. I can give you any project. I don't care if you're switching teams, going from working on, let's say, like you're working on outbound, cold calling, and then you need to go switch over to project managing proposals and RFPs, right? That's that trust factor. Like, hey, I trust, especially if you're younger in your career, right? If you're older, it might be, I think it's pretty universal, but it's like, hey, this person here, Noah, right? I can put them in any situation, and with a little bit of their grind, they'll figure it out and go there. That's where like the real
Mm.
multipliers, the real gem employees are, that are just skyrocketing their careers super fast. It's just the people that are like, because opportunities pop up, and you don't want to be someone that's only like a circle, right? You want to be someone that can bend different ways. So when opportunities come up, sometimes you get thrown into it, and sometimes you can choose,
Mm.
right? And pay to play, right?
Yeah.
Or you can say, hey, actually, I'm good here. Or sometimes it's like, hey, you want to go for it? And that was the last point. The third point I was going to make was, there's a time in a season for all things to go for it, to spend the extra hours, be in the office, travel, whatever. And there's times I want to say put the gas off, but just, no, I'm going to be more work-life balanced,
Mm.
and phases of life, right? We're thinking decades of a game here, right? We're not thinking just the next quarter, right?
Right.
But can you be self-reflective enough to know that? So that helps you with like speed and direction, is where you're at in life. The 7 point process can help you understand, okay, where do I get to the next step? Because it unlocks more doors for me as I get there. And then we talked about the value plan earlier as well. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm going very long-winded here, but
Oh, no, no.
a lot
I
of
love it.
things.
I love it. For building trust, you talk about being reliable, almost like referring to like character. And like this
Mhm.
person's character is what builds that trust. I'm curious from your perspective, how much of trust is dependent upon competency, like competence, and knowledge of skill sets and hard skills and things like that versus that reliability and that character. I'll give an example that I've experienced. So I have also not taken like the specialist route in terms of marketing. I've been very much more of a holistic marketers phrase it, where it's like I know how to bring all the different pieces together, kind of like Legos. That's why I like and just bring all these different pieces together to make one orchestrated campaign. But recently I've had a need to start to specialize a little bit more in terms of advertising skill sets, not just and so to build out or to create the value and the connection from the value or trust that you spoke to and has been very helpful that I'm trying to figure out is like, okay, how much of this trust is dependent upon my ability to do the job versus the fact that I will do the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The approach I take that's done me very well is the reverse engineering factor of it. Start with the end in mind, right? Reverse engineer back, and then that gives you your development plan going forward. With your Legos, right? They had to have a piece completed, right? And then they go backwards, and then you piece by piece to get there, right? So that's how you make your own Lego manual, if you will, because there's pieces all around us with technology and YouTube University and all that stuff there where we go to learn. But you need to do your best job at laying all the way out to the destination, work your way back. Sometimes it's not as linear of a way there, right? But also with time, you also know what it takes to get there. It's kind of hard to quantify that. But I know with certain types of projects that I take on that I've never done before versus what I've done before, you get to know your skill set. You get to know with these type of unknown projects, right, with question marks around them that I don't know what to do. It usually takes me this long to get there, right? And you sometimes just surprise yourself, right? But you get a feel for what you can take on, right? Okay, because you're usually these left outfield projects aren't what you spend 100% of your time on, right? You probably have 80% of your other job you got to go do, right? And this is like 20%, right? We all know, right? So it's like, do you have the ability to take it on, that burden? Because it can be very disorienting, taking on these projects because it's just, you're stretching your brain a lot, right? That way. So just what I see is really just starting with again, I like the metric. What's the outcome, right? I'm not. If I were, I used to say I'm a growth marketer. Now I like to say I'm a revenue marketer, right? A lot of these projects, how is it tied to revenue? That way, if we're going talking shop there, most jobs you want to like have some way to tie to revenue, even if you're stretching it, right? I know I talk to people that work in creative. Okay, how does my graphic tie to revenue? Right. Well, let's stretch it. Let's see how we can really stretch those KPIs there, right? There's a way. You just got to get creative with it. But what I'm getting at is being able to, that whole trust factor and all that stuff is, can you accurately scope it? And then knowing when, hey, I'm actually not going to get there, right? There's sometimes, and I don't do a lot of consulting now just because life is way too busy with all the endeavors I've got going on. In the past, when I've done some of that, I've had to walk away from projects, even though I can do it. I'm like, man, I don't have the bandwidth to do this myself right now. I can help you. And then I usually introduce someone in my network to backfill me and train them up and go for it, right? And do it a different way that way. But it's like, you need to know what your limit is, what your max is, right? Because if you're trying to go for a big project, right, and you don't know when to stop, right, you're going to just overwork that. Again, your goal is going to cross your boundary really quickly, and that's when you get in a really bad spot in your career where you're just over indexed and you have to, I call it being snared, right? Oh, I got snared on this event, right? And I have to just grit through it. And there's no fun way to get through it. You just have to really okay, this is a season of just going out my boundary for a little bit, but I know it's going to end in 2 months or 3 months when I get to see this through, right?
I love that. And that is something that I particularly like about how you wrote your book and discussing like the career narrative and regarding like how you think about it. Because you mentioned like having limits, and a lot of the self-improvement books that I've read and conversations that I've had is it's like, oh, like you want to see yourself as being limitless and you can do anything and there is no limit to what you can do. The limits are only in your mind. And the way that you were explaining your thought process there is really insightful, where limits can actually empower you if you understand what your limits are. As someone who struggles to recognize where his limits are, maybe you could help me understand how you've been able to do that, because I recognize the value listening to you of doing that, but I'm not sure where to start to figure that out.
Yeah, it's funny in my career with the people in my circle that I work with, right? I always have a joke of let's go find our limits, right? And then when we find it, right, or when someone finds it, usually they have some breakdown moment. They're probably crying. Again, it doesn't happen all the time, but
Sure.
sometimes it does that way. They
Yeah.
just get way like, I'm like, you found your limit, and like, let's celebrate that. Congratulations, right? This is now where we need to stop. But now we know a couple, we're going to stop a little bit before this next time.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's important to have that experienced person. So a lot of times I have an analogy of there's people all around you, right? So obviously the mentors too pageant-esque or romantic of a word for me. I don't like that word too much, right? But there's people that are on the trail with you, right? There's people that have done the trail before, right? There's like in every movie, there's that old sage in the background that's always in the village that you've lived in that you never really realize who's the grand wizard, whatever, right? So like there's people around you that can be that voice for you, that counsel that way. And it's so important to have that perspective there, especially like at your job, right? So your manager hopefully has to be something like that, but you can also have different influence in people of influence help shape you there, right? And I try to do that as much as possible to the people around me on my department and all that stuff, just to be like, hey, like, because there's two ways. There's people that don't see their potential, right, and are underutilized, and you help them find their full potential. That's kind of the inverse, right? And then there's the people that are going a little too hard, right? And they're going to burn out, the star there. So there's that little, again, I'm a big boundary guy, as you can tell, right?
I love it. Yeah. This is good.
But it's on both sides. So you can't be undergoing. A lot of people are just like, oh, this is the bare minimum. They don't see the opportunity at hand, right? But at the same time, you got to push them to go for it, but not exert. I think exertion is the right word. Now, if you are going to exert, like I know people that take certain roles. Hey, I'm going to be in this role for 2 quarters a year, and it's going to put me in an exertion state, right? And then they're prepared for it. Like, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable. And there's usually some compromise of compensation, or they know that, like, a lot of times they go to, like, there's people that are like working in at school, probably what you've been feeling for, right? I'm going to exert myself a little more than I want to, but it's going to pay off, right? But as long as it's intentional exertion where you have an exit point on that, it's those that don't know the direction they're going and exerting themselves, hoping, hey, I trust my company that I'm going to be in the right spot. Don't do that, right? I mean, we're not bad people, but they're not as self-interested as you need to be with yourself. You have to be at some point.
Yeah.
Again, you got to push yourself, and you got to encourage people to rise up. You can't overdo it, but you can't it's like such a mix there, and it always constantly evolves because our lives are ever changing, the industries are ever changing. Another fun adage, I'm just full of one-liners.
I love it.
People at work joke, oh, it's another Bryceism, right? This one is like I say all the time because it's one in hyper growth startup madness that I work in, right? Every process breaks every 45 days. Every 45 days, you're gonna have to reinvent the wheel, right? With the speed of companies I work with. And we always joke about it of like, oh, it's been 45. And it's always like, hey, when do we put it? Oh, it was about 45 days ago. And I always like call it, and people are like, oh, and then they just like moan and like some bad dad joke or whatever. Like, oh, Bryce is right again, right? But every 45 days, you got to reinvent yourself, right? Or rewrite your job description if we're talking personal development level, right? Rewrite your job description every 45 days. That's half a quarter, right? We usually set our OKRs or quarterly objectives, right? But you got to do a check halfway through, rewrite it, get ready, and go, right? And it goes by so fast. But if you don't do that and you're just going off these assumptions that you've had for a while, things change so fast in the startup world that you got to be not afraid to iterate and reinvent yourself constantly. Otherwise, and you can do it if you're proactive about it, you can rewrite it in your favor constantly. You can write out things in your job description that are drains and write in more things that are fountains with it as you provide value.
I love that. And that kind of goes towards what you were saying earlier about finding a way to be more efficient with your time and then building like the side projects that eventually become your new job description or become where you go next. And that ties very beautifully to that. And I really appreciate your insight on trying to find your limits. Because I think to your point, like you don't want to just be doing the bare minimum, but that idea of like you're actively looking for that limit, like completely just destroys the mentality of like, oh, we're just going to do the minimum. Because then you'd be like, how little can I do and get away with it? But rather you're looking for your limit. You're trying to go up. But then once you hit it, you recognize that and you appreciate it and you respect that. And
respect it.
I feel like that is such a perfect way of verbalizing that balance and being able to speak to that. You mentioned the hyper growth startups you've been in and are in. I'd love to dive into that a little bit. You and I became acquainted and met through your work at MX, and you did fantastic work there. I had the privilege of attending some of the summits that were hosted, and they were fantastic.
These wrinkles here. Our team went crazy. We call it summit season. Yeah. Our team did all.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Because it's quite an event you put on. And I mean, to be the one orchestrating that, like, intense.
That was a piece of the puzzle, right? So sure. I'm not claiming the full thing. Sure. Yeah. We played a role.
But yeah, you've been in multiple situations like that. You were at Qualtrics before MX. Now you're at Lone Pro. So you're becoming, well, not becoming, you already are, but continuously strengthening your presence as a trusted voice within the fintech world, especially locally Utah. I would love to just pick your brain on that a little bit if I could. For you, when you're looking at innovation, whether it's in a hyper growth stage or in a startup, or maybe in a business that's a little bit more developed on the growth trajectory, like you were at Qualtrics, or in a situation like with Lone Pro right now, like more towards that, they're like in the startup era right now. How do you approach innovation? Because I feel like you're talking like reinventing yourself every 45 days. Like from an organization standpoint, that's really hard to nail down the appropriate balance there. And in fintech, like you're dealing with so much in terms of competition, the environment, the regulatory environment, like who you're partnering with and everything. So I'd love to know how Bryce tackles that.
Yeah, there's a great book by Michael Watkins. I highly recommend everyone reads, called The First 90 Days. So when you jump into a new company, or even right now, it's a great reinvent yourself book.
Yeah.
First 90 days sets the trajectory for the rest of your career. And it's a really good book that helps you see a lot of different ways of like different departments within your company. Like, are they in a startup phase within the startup? Are they established? Are they, doing a pivot, whatever? Really great book. So that's one to kind of go deep. If you want to go really deep on those type of things, is that way. But, I would say like to quote the old Dark Knight, I feel like I'm like a Bane figure where I was born in the darkness, right? I was born in the hyper growth startup. Like, I was at BYU. I needed a part-time job. I got a entry level SDR position right down the street from where I went to school. It was convenient, and I got super lucky there. Lucky break. Like I had no idea of what type of company Qualtrics was. Right? But I got in, and it was great. But what I look for in general is hunger, right? Hunger is a great attribute. How hungry is the company you work for, right? And there's a difference between hunger and desperation, and hunger and aggressiveness. I think hunger is a really good one, because your biggest, I'm not going to talk too grandiose, but a trap that you can encounter in your career is success. Success satisfies. And when you've been more successful than you've ever been, right? Like, hey, I'm feeling pretty good, right? But with startups, you got to have that like year-over-year growth, right? Your personal growth rate has to be equal or greater than your company's growth rate, right? Because if you're working a 40-hour week and your company is growing at 50%, that means if you stay the same and your company grows, well, that it's going to double your workload basically, right? You have that growth out there, the potential. So you gotta have that hunger in yourself, and that's definitely something where we have to think through and utilize that way. But I would also say that, when you look at innovation at companies, it's hard to do with some startups, easier than others. I start with the data. I'm a B2B marketer, right? Where we have our CRMs, we have our customers, we have our targets, right? You have your sales team. The data on the marketing side is where I try to get literate first. That's going to tell a lot of stories there, right? Getting to know in your CRM what hygiene matters. We all know there's a thousand fields in there, but probably 20 that actually like are accurate and matter, right?
Yeah.
Talking just in generals here, right? As much as we want it to be better than that. But by knowing that, right? And then that's where you can get more sophisticated on those type of things. But if you can get data literate and know how to go chase things down, know, hey, I want to find what type of customers are we closing, what type of deals are we not closing, why are we losing, and why are we winning that, right? It gives you a lot of information to be really quick. Can I pull my own reports really quickly, right? Hey, I need to find a target account list that's in Dallas because we have an event there.
Yeah.
There's a really funny image. I call it the dotted line cat. So there's one picture has like a lot of dots of like, okay, here's knowledge, and then like experience starting to connect some dots, but then the creativity, like outlines a cat within there, right? And that's you got to have knowledge, experience, but then that creativity factor there, right? But the data is going to help you get some inputs to connect the dots, but over time you can really get creative with that narrative and go for it. So for me, innovation really start every company I've been to. I've tried to get into the data as fast as I can and let them give me as much data as possible.
I love that. That's very helpful. As you're getting like buy-in, like you mentioned, like side projects, and as we're talking about innovation, like as you get buy-in from either stakeholders within your own company or like in fintech with those you're partnering with as well, is there common pushback, or are there common attitudes that you prepare for?
Question. I think it's so intuitive to me now, so I don't really like stress me. I just show up nowadays.
Yeah.
But early in my career, right, you do need to, I mean, it's respect, right? These executives are there for a reason, right? And you need to, there's trust that you have in them and a little vice versa, but they're definitely there and they have the final say, right, on things. I would say the way I prepare for most meetings, not to be repetitive, is the data, right? If I'm trying to propose something, I try to show it in the data, right? A lot of times it's like you do it once, then can you replicate it 2 to 3 times? Then you take it to an executive. You don't just take a big bright idea out of the blue to someone. You usually have some, again, I like to say 1 in 10 marketing plays is actually scalable to other parts of the marketing or other accounts. So do it with 1, try to replicate it with 3, right? And then you go for it. So
yeah, very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that, and it's something that like I'm also trying to figure out as I am working on building that trust. Is like, hey, where's an appropriate level of like being able to ask those questions, like, hey, let's try to innovate without overstepping in some sense. So I appreciate that. That's helpful advice. If there was one piece of advice that you'd like to leave to any professional who might be struggling to find direction right now, what would your advice be?
I know we talked about a lot of things on the podcast, but I'll be repetitive on one thing. I think it'd be, this is the one, right? Challenge your assumptions, right? This is so important. And I said a lot in this podcast, but it's such a big one. Are you aware of what's an assumption that you're basing your life off of, right? And how often are you validating or pressure testing those assumptions, those values, those goals, right? And if you don't do that, then you're going to be in a really tricky spot. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd go through is, can you see your assumptions? Can you challenge them? And then refining them down, right, with experience. Don't go through the motions there. Be intentional in your endeavors.
I love it. Thank you. I really appreciate you hopping on, Bryce. I know you're a busy guy. I have really benefited from not only like following you on LinkedIn and looking at your career path, but also just all the insights that I've gained from you, from reading your book, from watching you in your career for the past few years as I've tried to figure out like what I'm doing myself. So like,
root for you, man. Root for you. You're gonna be
you.
great. I'm definitely watching your career as well. So you're gonna make it.
Thanks, man. That means a lot coming from you. Thank you. Appreciate you being willing to share some of your time and to share your advice. And my last question for you today it's the traditional question for my podcast, which is, what does happiness mean to you?
Yeah, I think let's take the inverse, right? The depression, right? And have opposite of happiness is depression. A definition that I like with depression is, do you want to go do something but you're stuck in something that where you want to go beyond it, but you're literally just you can't, right? So I think happiness in my mind is the ability. Well, let me take all this back. Maybe edit this out and redo it.
You're good. You're good.
I would say happiness is living, but it's kind of a little bit of a stoicism thing, right? I would say happiness is if you can honestly live by a set of values that you are intentional about, not just assumptions or you are just thinking about it, but if you can honestly live by the values you set, no matter what happens in your life, you will be happy, right? Because you're intentional about it and you're in that value plane, right? And if you need to depart from it for a little bit, you have a return path in there. If you live by those values that you refine constantly and your goals are all within there, right, you're going to have satisfaction, joy out of it, right? Because you're intentionally deciding to live your life this way. And that's how I'd say you'd be happy.
Wow. Setting your values and living within those values. I love it. Yep. I love it. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon, Bryce. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, man.
Thank you for listening to the Why Not podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and share with your friends.